Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to dive into the latest and greatest in the world of Star Wars news and take your guys' questions, comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss this week. Send it over in the chat room right now. It is first come, first serve, but super chats bump you up to the top. You will guarantee your question on tonight's stream if you are sending in a super chat. Also, make sure you check out our Patreon and YouTube membership programs right now. You can join and get priority chat access if you're of a certain tier. So make sure you do so. Check out those membership programs where there are a lot of really great perks over there. So maybe you might be interested in some other things as well as just the priority chat access. We have a few topics in the world of Star Wars to discuss this week. Obviously, the big thing in the world of Star Wars this week is tomorrow. We are getting Star Wars Visions Volume 3. So we're going to discuss that, the preview kind of for that, a lot more information about some of the episodes coming out, but we'll all see it tomorrow when it fully drops. We also have the information regarding the hunt for Ben Solo, some new stuff coming out, some new information about the timeline, the pipeline, because we talked about a lot of the stuff last week that just kind of didn't make sense around the story, the whether there was actually a script done, whether it was in the pre-production stage. We're going to talk about all the new information we found out this week. We're also going to talk about the rumor that David Fincher was making a Star Wars movie that fell apart post Rise of Skywalker. Lots of stuff going on in the post Rise of Skywalker world as well. We're about to record our review of The Last Order. So that book came out last Tuesday. We're not going to talk about it tonight unless you guys have a question about it. But rest assured, we read it, and the world of the post Rise of Skywalker Star Wars stories is really just kicking off right now, and it's going to continue here in the future. So let us know what your guys' thoughts are on all of these topics, and then let us know any questions you have here in the chat. All right, let's start with Ben Solo. So last week we did talk about the Ben Solo story. Obviously, it was huge. Everybody's been talking about it the past week. And we kind of had, a lot of things in the report that just, to me, overall didn't make sense. They said they had a script, but if you were rejected in the pitch stage, how do you have a script? Because you can't write a script until after they approve your project. They also talked about how some of the timeline with Bob Iger rejecting it didn't quite make sense if they were brought on in 2021. So when was this project officially canceled? We had a lot of things cleared up over the last week. I mean, nothing really officially. Most of this is coming from reports and people doing digging on this specific story. The report from the playlist has suggested that Lucasfilm was about to enter pre-production on the film and that they did have a fully finished script. And it was then that they took it to Bob Iger and Alan Bergman, who dismissed it much more quickly than Lucasfilm expected. Soderbergh himself has confirmed it was the first fully conceptualized idea that Kathleen Kennedy ever took to Bob Iger that the CEO said no to. And then, according to the report, the script by Scott Z. Burns was completed. It hailed from a pitch from Steven Soderbergh and Rebecca Blunt, the alias used by Soderbergh's wife, Jules Asner. Burns, who received $3 million for writing the script, so we did have an actual writer paid to do this, is Lucasfilm's highest paid writer yet. The movie, which had the internal codename of Quiet Leaves, was a concept that the people at Lucasfilm were quite excited about, but Kathleen Kennedy gave it her stamp of approval, while CCO Dave Filoni and head of development Carrie Beck were also closely involved in the process. The report describes it as being in the ready-to-shoot phase, and as part of the pitch to Disney, they even proposed a filming start date. Unfortunately, a lack of creativity on the part of people in Disney's C-suite above Kennedy is apparently to blame for why Hunt for Ben Solo didn't move forward, despite all the momentum it had going for it. Alan Bergman, Disney Entertainment co-chair, and Kathleen Kennedy's immediate superior took an unusually long time to read the script, and ultimately he and CEO Bob Iger expressed confusion as to how Ben Solo, who had died in The Rise of Skywalker, could return. Both had reservations about the franchise's continuity, which shocked Lucasfilm since they felt the story's logic was clear and creatively sound, quote. So that's all just kind of interesting stuff around this. I mean, it sounds like a true internal battle over this project, which I think is fascinating. Um, Overall, it makes a lot more sense now what's going on. I just personally, I mean, still as an outsider, right? Like I haven't worked in the studio system, especially in the scripting phase. Um, as an outsider, though, it's still surprising that you could pay $3 million to a writer, have this whole thing going, and yet the higher ups still don't know about it or aren't like aware of it enough to have an opinion on it, and then they wait until the whole thing's like ready to go, and then they're like, nah, actually we'll just waste that 3 million, we're not going to do this. Like, that's a surprise. I know 3 million for them is kind of nothing, but like still, it seems like if you're wasting not just money but your resources of the studio, like the studio's time, everybody's working on this project, right? To have the whole thing going and then to cancel it late, I still feel like there are more things around this than just that. The article continues to say it speculated that the decision had everything to do with internal politics. The report suggests that Bergman was being prepped by Iger to be his potential successor, and that Iger backed Bergman's skepticism of the film. Since then, however, the prospect of Bergman succeeding Iger has internally been met with skepticism inside Disney, with executives like Josh D'Amaro, who's the park's chief executive, and Dana Walden, the other entertainment co-chairwoman, potentially rising. So, I mean, it sounds like just an internal battle. But again, yeah, I still don't really quite understand how it gets to that point where you have it about to start shooting. They have a production date there. And also it's just shocking that this was not leaked. After all the Star Wars things that were leaked, the one that's about to actually start shooting, the one that's not just an idea that may or may not happen, is the one that wasn't leaked. That tells you how like closely they kept this whole thing. But alas, this movie was not made. But I do think what we're seeing from the fandom has a good shot. We do have some updates as well on the fact that this is just not just gone viral on the internet. I mean, this has been a huge thing. People are flying planes over Disney Studios in Burbank saying they want The Hunt for Ben Solo made. People put advertisements in Times Square saying they want this movie made. It is a real phenomenon for them, and honestly, some of the most momentum the film side of Star Wars has had in 7 to 10 years. So anyway, Sonic, what are your thoughts on the updates, the kind of the clarity that has started to come from them, some of these reports? And again, these reports are just that. They're reports. They're not the official word of Disney or Lucasfilm, but it seems to be a pretty accurate depiction of how these things go. It's just surprising that it took so long for them to kill the project when they had so much money and so much time already invested in it.
I mean, it's nice to get clarity, but it's not still to me very clear why this had to all happen. It really does feel like it is just political maneuvering for who's going to be Iger's new successor. I think there's definitely some baggage about how, a lot of the spending that he did in his first term worked quite well with all the big IP franchising that he's doing with Disney through Star Wars and through the MCU, through Marvel, and then to then go to Chapek, who is his handpicked successor, and see how quickly that all fell apart to the point that it started really affecting even the parks and all that. I mean, yeah, he was really trying to retire. He was really trying to be fully on board as Disney Plus being his crown jewel, the next big step in media, and it just didn't happen, right? And I can understand coming back, like the difficulties of all that, and how there will be more pressure on you to be like, okay, you were essentially admitting that if you needed to come back because you've messed up this much, but now there's also that pressure on like things that he was doing or things that he was influencing, during this little time period where he was still around the company, but not quite leading the company as he was previously in the late 2010s. So all this Bergman stuff, I'm like, great, sure. I can see why he could be the next successor. He's been brought up quite a bit. But everything from the Lucasfilm side, I'm like, oh God, it just what is going on here? Like that you have something so unified, something so clear by everybody. Like, and there is maneuvering too within Lucasfilm. I mean, every company in any field has anything like that, right? Like it's just the basic fact that people want to have a little bit more say. People want to be the decision makers versus other people. That's just what happens, right? People don't just let things naturally fall in place. That's not how business works. But for Lucasfilm, that's had a little bit of its ups and downs, has had a lot of influence from Iger previously to change projects, to be reshaped, to be reformed, to have every like major party, new and old, involved, being like, yeah, no, this is it, and this is like a huge auteur director that we have on board for a project that'll fit closer to his sort of budget, that'll have the biggest star of the sequels, come back and do something even better than he possibly has done in The Last Jedi. And just to cut it off because, like, oh, I don't understand how this could happen. I mean, for one, that tells me like that Iger and Bergman clearly don't look at like animation or anything outside of like TV shows and movies that are in live action, because we've had characters like Maul come back, right? Star Wars is always kind of known for revivals. And in this franchise where we have literal like force spirits, force ghosts, like the concept of death is not necessarily like, oh, that's it, that's over, right? Like, is Ben Solo, somehow not trained? Yeah, sure, not trained like Anakin was, and therefore maybe can come into being a Force ghost. Yeah, that could be very plausible. That would again also entail them to have an understanding of how the lore works about, you know, transferring your spirit, learning from the wills, and everything like that, right? So it's just sad to me that like one, it doesn't seem like, and I don't really expect CEOs to like know like, hey, Darth Maul is like, this is exactly how I return all this and that, but I'd at least think that the guy who was around for when Disney Plus launched with Mandalorian and with Clone Wars season 7, where Maul is like prominently featured, right, would at least have an idea of that. Like, fans might not always love when characters come back, but when it's done well, when it has like a lot of, backing behind it, when there's a lot of great revisions and writing and execution by all stakeholders, people are excited. People are down for it. And it's led to some of the best Star Wars storytelling. We've had proof of that in a lesser form, right? And I know there's a riskiness overall with the sequels, right? Like it is something that, it's not going to just necessarily be like one good film undoes a lot of people's damages, right? It's not just how people feel about it, it's how the internet has partially become polarized during the era of the sequels, partly because of it too. And now we live in a world where, yes, there are definitely people who are very critical about stuff in a good, well-meaning way, but there's also people who aren't like aware that like a lot of their opinions and everything are being shaped by like how much of the internet is automated by bots and everything like that. How much of everything is kind of tied to political stuff and like all that, right? But on top of all of that, the biggest issue at the end of the day with the sequels still stems from Iger kind of rushing the Force Awakens when they wanted an extra year, wanted to have 3-year gaps, right? The Rise of Skywalker, once everything with Trevor fell through because he couldn't work around Carrie Fisher's death, bringing back JJ and Kathleen and JJ are like, well, we need at least 6 more months to make this film get off the ground. A lot of the issues that are with the sequels arguably come because of Iger, the person who's now saying, no, this is risky. We can't do that. It seems, and it's not just here. It seems like in all the other franchises that he's has under Disney, he's kind of been this guy who's like risk averse, risk averse, risk averse, despite a lot of these franchises, especially Star Wars, being place where storytelling has kind of flourished in pop culture by taking some of these bigger swings, by taking these risks. So to now be risk averse when you've had everything lined up, and when you have a production date, like you're saying, right? Like everything lined up, that also implies that you've got a cast, like things are ready, and none of this leaking. Like this is as ideal as it gets. Like so much of the sequel era, because it was JJ for 2 films, even though he'd always talk about the mystery box and how he wanted to keep things private, I do think he kind of was leaking a lot of that stuff out there for sure. Because we did not hear nearly as much from Ryan Johnson in The Last Jedi, right? So Soderbergh, he doesn't really have the same sort of snoops that the internet has on all these like big franchise directors. For him to have had everything lined up, for a big actor like Adam Driver to not really have had anything on his calendar to suggest that, hey, he's going to be working on this film. You got everything lined up for this to be like a surprise bam. I mean, they could have even maybe kept it quiet for like a month or two, put a quick teaser out, and suddenly people are like, wait, whoa, what's happening? And could you just imagine like the almost like furious curiosity that everyone's like, now I need to know everything. When did this happen? Like, bam, bam, bam. Like, this would only make everybody like just excited because now it's like something's in production finally, and it's with the arguably the best character of the sequels, right? Even if it doesn't come out perfectly, I think people would at least be like, you have to take a swing with this amount of talent, with the level of talent that these sequels, as great as the cast and crew were, this is another step with a director now at a different level, right? So I understand a little bit more now. I can get the clarity of it. It just doesn't make me feel any better about it, right? So frustrating for me. I'm liking that the fans are definitely like all going around Burbank with little flags and up in the air, the Times Square ad and all. I think we need to also call out that like that Times Square one. Like if you don't know what it's about, like when the quote says "No one's ever truly gone." Hashtag the hunt for Ben Sol-" Like people don't get. It's not like a very visually clear ad to me, right? And there's like a blue butterfly that people on Twitter are using in their profile headings and all that. I love the energy. Absolutely in there. I'm reposting like everybody else and I'm talking about it, putting it on our socials. But at the same time, I'm looking at it as like, is there something a little bit more visually clear? A little bit more that screams like, hey, this is the first movie post episode 9 with one of the best characters of the sequels. And that quote, no one's truly ever gone. That's not even like a Ben Solo Kylo Ren quote, right? It's just I get that's what we feel as like an online fandom right now who has not really had anything to like chew on like a live action film has proven to deliver in Star Wars. But yeah, we need to step it up. I think people flying over Burbank, that was pretty good. That's as solid as you get there. But once you have a Times Square ad, you kind of go a little bit more visually distinct something. And I get it. There's nothing truly from the film or anything, but like even the silhouette of like Kylo Ren or something like that, just to like get people going like, hey, that kind of looks familiar or something. If you don't pause to read in Times Square when there are hundreds of billboards, hundreds of different lights and attractions to pull your attention, and you just see something that's black text, blue text on a black background, and it just looks like a Twitter tweet kind of just put up there. Maybe it doesn't click as hard for the general audience who also needs to be bought in, right? So that's my only critique of all this right now. I'm absolutely loving the energy. I'm loving the discussion. I'm not the biggest Raylo supporter, but I appreciate all their strong fandom and unification and really driving all this stuff. And just the fact that this is getting us to have some really fun conversations about the sequels again, instead of just like, oh, I didn't like this, or there's issues with that, or just fighting. But yeah, we need to, if you want this to happen, and if this is some elaborate marketing scheme, the fans also have to take it another level. That's all I'm gonna say, because that's the one thing that I'm like, oh man, everything has been so right. Just once you're in reality, once you're there with just other people who probably haven't seen a Star Wars film since 2019, you kind of have to like give it your best punch. And I think we're just a little short there.
Well, and we have to continue with this for a long time. It can't just
Yeah.
be a couple weeks. That'll really be what gets them, is the continuous pressure. Like what Adam Driver needs to be asked about it every time he's interviewed. Steven Soderbergh needs to be asked about it every time he's interviewed. That type of stuff will put the pressure on them, because the more and more questions they get, they'll see those questions to Adam Driver. They won't necessarily look at people's Twitter accounts. They'll be like, they'll if Adam Driver keeps getting pestered and his answer is constantly, well, I don't know why they canceled it. We really loved it. And he says that over and over. I know the fans really want it. If he's saying that a million times, then they'll do it. Just like they eventually caved on Obi-Wan. Like they've caved on projects before that seemingly were up in the air, and then get the pressure and they're like, okay, we'll do it. And this one is, I think, frankly, even more exciting, because if it ever is greenlit, like they might need some revisions from whatever they're working on now that wasn't in the cards, i.e., Starfighter, maybe back when they were making this script, but they wouldn't have to do much. It would be all set to go. They just need to lock down people's schedules, lock down their locations, and then they could probably start production pretty close after announcing it. So it could be one of those things that's a surprise announcement at some convention or something, and they get going on it right away. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's great to have some clarity. it also makes it even more frustrating that it didn't happen. And it's just I'm really interested in the timeline. Like, I want to find out what year was it pitched and officially canceled, and what month as well, because we speculated obviously that Bob Iger didn't come back into the fold until 2022 at Disney, and it was late 2022. So in order for him to have rejected it, it would probably have needed to be in 2023. And if it was in 2023, was it before Star Wars Celebration when we got the announcement of the Rey movie, and when we got, all those big announcements, the Ahsoka or Dave Filoni movie, Dawn of the Jedi, right? Because it would be really interesting if they decided to cancel this movie before and then said, well, what we really should do is a Rey Jedi Order movie, even though we don't really have much with that project. And even though we're not 100% sure about the direction we're going, that's what we should announce, not the Ben Solo movie we've been working on for a couple of years. Like, that would have been, that's fascinating if that was the case. Not saying it was, I have no idea, but it would be fascinating if this was replaced with the Rey movie. And it would be even more fascinating if this was developed coinciding with the Rey movie, or if the Rey movie was even started just because they were like, okay, now we've got the Ben Solo movie coming, let's do a Rey movie as well. Uh-oh, Ben Solo is now no longer coming back to life. What do we do with this Rey movie where Ben Solo is a major character? Like, what that probably is part of the reason why we're seeing delays for all this stuff, is because this might have been the cog in the machine, the thing that got Ben back in the story, and now every other post Rise of Skywalker script is trying to use that, and then now all of them have to be rewritten because they got rid of Ben and he's not coming back anymore. So there's a lot of chips that need to fall on this story. It's really fascinating. I can't wait to continue to find out more about it, but I do hope that the fan fervor for this isn't something that just kind of dies with a whimper. I think the fans have made their mark so far, but as we, see over and over and over again, nobody in higher up positions pays attention unless they're pestered by it for years. If like they have to really continue to be bothered by these questions, because otherwise they'll just wait for it to blow over, and then they'll make their decision once the outrage, for lack of a better word, is blown over. But now if they hear about it constantly, we actually have a shot at this getting made. But yeah, what do you guys think about the story, the updates? Do you think the fan promotion and the fan fervor is strong enough to get this made? Do you want to see this movie made? Let us know in the chat. And if you're in the chat right now, make sure you keep sending in your questions. This will probably be a stream where we get to more questions than usual. So make sure you keep sending in those questions. Also, if you're watching right now, make sure you hit the like button. Not a lot more people are watching currently than have liked the stream. So please do so. It really helps out our channel. Let's go to the chat here and see what some people are saying about this particular film. Let's see. Uh Not too many comments about this. Critical Thinker says, I don't have too much interest in the Kylo movie. I get being mad. So Soderbergh and Driver were wasted on, or about Iger supposedly dropping a complete script. But Kylo somehow returning does not sound like it would be the one story to save Star Wars or anything like that. So from that perspective, I'm surprised there's this much interest in this film. I don't think anybody's saying it's going to save Star Wars. I mean, again, I'll say it like I've said 100 times on our stream. The only thing that saves Star Wars, if it's currently, needing saving, is consistent success. Not one project is not going to do it. It will never do it. When you have a franchise that puts out this much content, you need consistent success, because consistent failure is why we're in this place. It's why we're here in the first place. It's consistent failure, consistent mediocrity, consistently bad stuff. That's why we're here, because we just came off of one of our best Star Wars things ever with Andor season 2, but it still feels like we're kind of in this monotony with Star Wars, because so much of the other stuff that's come out in the last 3-4 years has been mediocre at best. And so it's not going to save Star Wars, but I think it has an absolutely huge chance of helping resurrect the post-sequel timeline, because Ben Solo, whether you like Ben Solo or not, and I'm saying the audience, not specifically just you, critical thinker. If you like Ben Solo or not, it's undeniable that Ben Solo is both the most iconic new character from the sequels and the most well liked overall. I think overall he's the one that most people identified with, most people enjoyed, even if not everybody liked him. But the general audience gravitated towards that character more than they gravitated towards Rey or Poe or Finn. And so I think if you're going to continue with that set of characters, Ben Solo is the one that I think people felt the most kind of gypped by not getting, and the one that people liked the most. So if you're going to go back to that well, I think the safest place is to go back to him and set the world around him. We've How many times have we talked about on these streams not having a Skywalker in the future movies? What does that do for the Skywalker saga, right? If you want to make episode 10, 11, and 12, what does it do to the saga to not have a true Skywalker, just to have an adopted Skywalker? Well, now you have one if you bring him back, and you have him genuinely a part of whatever the future is. I think there's a lot of things that you can do with Ben that you can't really do with other characters that makes this project unique. Not to mention, he's just the character that seems to have connected with the most people throughout the sequel trilogy. So I understand where you're coming from, and I understand that you personally don't want to see it that much. But I do have to side more with the group of people who think this could actually be a massive benefit for Star Wars, because I truly do think if you had a film that was great starring a sequel character, regardless of what people's opinions about the sequel characters were before a great movie, eventually people are going to have to come on board if the continued stuff is really, really good. And you have a high chance of it being great with the caliber of talent on this specific project.
Yeah, I've voiced a lot of the same feelings. I get you don't really have much interest in canon and the sequel storytelling there, critical thinker. You know, you're always talking about like all the great legacy of the Force books and stuff like that, and it's great to see your journey there. But at the end of the day, that's not recent Star Wars, right? The most recent Star Wars that the general audience knows is going to be the sequels and the Mandalorian, right? And the Mandalorian in some ways, you know, shot itself in the foot with season 3, shot itself well before that with Book of Boba Fett, and it's the strange pacing and kind of just character changes there, and then hijacking its own show there with Mando 2.5, and not trusting that audiences, especially streaming audiences, would be able to be ready in like a year or two for the character to come back. I'm seeing so many responses online, people saying like, man, if we had only had like season 3 just be truly focused on Din and Bo, a little bit more of the aggressiveness that we thought was going to happen between at least coming from Bo towards Din and then resulting in the freeing of Mandalore. You can still have everything that happens with Gideon and all this and that, and then you only then just get to Grogu at the very end, like he comes in just to help with the the final battle, or once you finish all the Mandalore quests and you've gotten Din a little bit more secure and where he stands with children of the path and where he stands as a Mandalorian and what that means to him, then maybe they'd drive together to go get Grogu and be like, this is now the time. Like, I need to reunite with my son. Yeah, I think we would be seeing Mandalorian and Grogu have way, way more hype, right? Again, it's not the best teaser, I will say that, but it is what we know it to be basically a season 4, at least half of a season 4 being put into like an adventure of the week movie. Hopefully that can take to another level and remind us of like a little bit more of the season 1 and season 2 highs of the show versus a lot of the confusion with Book of Boba Fett and season 3. But at the end of the day, that's a streaming show, right? It was it was a great thing when we are all at home, but people's memories of COVID in 2020, like just a huge thing that people still have this refrain for about COVID and that time period of like being at home is like so many things happen and then suddenly the world shut down and then you're just doing things day by day and you kind of lose track of the day sometimes, right? Streaming kind of worked super well there because it can just grab your attention. You can get all the episodes at once or week by week. It's like a nice little routine thing there. But once the world started opening back up, things like just kind of went back to normal to some degree. And then what are the things that linger? Things that feel like events, things that feel like, wow, everybody was gathered together. We're here to experience it. It was not just online. It was offline. It was through Celebration, Star Wars Celebration. It was through Comic-Con. It's through merchandising. It's through everything, right? And that's something that Mandalorian as a TV show has not truly ever reached because, it's a TV show. So if someone was like a little bit burned after episode 8 and was like, "Oh, I don't really love 9," even though I was really hoping it'd be course correction, but they get the chance to be like, "Oh, I can kind of watch 7, 8, and then jump into the hunt for Ben Solo and just get myself a recap of episode 9." Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's what Soderbergh is doing. If you look at his like watch history on Letterboxd for all the Star Wars films that he's been watching, he's watching everything except episode 9. So in a lot of ways, it does seem like yes, he would probably follow the rules of, you know, um, follow the rules of what episode 9 establishes and the lore there, but then you still jump into everything that's going to go on with Kylo and all that. And I know you're saying right now, why do you think people seem so much more hyped about Kylo movie than Return to any other Stranger Things sequel trilogy characters? I don't think people are not hyped. I think Rey's movie has just been gestating so long, and she doesn't have like a director that is like a famous narrative film director. Charmine's background is as an Oscar documentary filmmaker about her like experiences and as a woman in Pakistan and all that, right? That's great. That's wonderful. And we need strong female voices to actually improve the female characters like a Rey that doesn't necessarily have the same standing as an Ahsoka or in some cases like a Bo-Katan or Padme or whatever, right? Like it's great to get all these voices on board, but it's not like someone that like catches your eye, right? It's just the fact nobody really knows Charmine unless you've seen her documentary. And the fact that it was announced and it had like a lot of fanfare and then nothing. All we've been hearing is through the trades like, oh, Lindelof left. Oh, Stephen Knight came on. Oh, Stephen Knight left. Oh, but we got a great writer. Daisy Ridley is always saying, I'm so excited about what I've read so far. And that's kind of where we've been left off. Like we haven't heard anything for like 7, 8 months, right? So it's like, why would you say people aren't excited about Ray? Well, because there hasn't been anything, and what we've heard hasn't trended positively. It's kind of trended either at best stagnantly or it's gone lower. People still want to see Finn as a stormtrooper turned Jedi, as Episode 9 implies, right? Want to see him actually use the Force, use a lightsaber. People have always talked about, hey, I want to see the Stormtrooper Rebellion or what he does to continue to free the First Order Stormtroopers from their brainwashing, from their morale training, and everything like that. That's still something that people really want. That was in Duel of the Fates with him and Poe as like leading that part, right? So that's something that people still really want to see. But we have John Boyega, who's been pretty mixed about what he felt about Star Wars, about the marketing of him in The Force Awakens to start off the sequels, to what Rian Johnson kind of left him with as a stagnant story arc in his mind, to what he felt was promised by JJ, what actually came out in the film, up and down, right? He's a little bit more positive, but he's kind of been doing a little bit more of that critically acclaimed, a little bit more low key career than as opposed to like big franchise filmmaking, right? MCU rumors were around him, and he was like, "Nah, I'm not doing T'Challa. I'm not doing anything like that. That's not really what I'm into anymore after Star Wars." So yeah, that's why there isn't any hype for it because there's no like concept of it being like pitched in the same way. When you have a film lined up from the production standpoint perfectly well and kept such a secret that it would have been like a surprise shock drop for the trailer at the rate it was going. And you could have had a probably strong, talented cast with the talent right behind it. Yeah, I think that's why people are hyped because it's not just that, oh, it's like it's came out of nowhere and people like Kylo. But yeah, people like Kylo, but people like when everything in Lucasfilm feels planned out, something that has been a criticism of the sequel trilogy feels like they're taking another step forward by bringing a touristic vision, right? Not giving up on like, oh, Star Wars can't have auteur directors after Rian Johnson arguably was the last one, right? We've looked at what we're seeing with Sean Levy and his film, and I like Sean Levy, especially with what he's doing with Stranger Things and all that. But he's more famous to most people for Night in the Museum films, right? He's not really like a big director until Deadpool and Wolverine for a lot of people, right? So and even then, nobody's gonna say like, oh, he's at the same level as like a Fincher or Soderbergh, like these guys who have done so many different genres with so many different actors and all that. They're like, yeah, he's a great worksman director. But if you're telling me The Hunt for Ben Solo could have been already well post production right now, ready to release like next year, and that was kickstarting this post sequel era as opposed to a Sean Levy film, right? What? Yeah, it has Gosling, it has Mia Goth. I think people would have even more hype for that, right? It's just the fact that a lot of people who are in the industry, people who follow film, liked a lot of what's happening. People who had issues with the sequels and its structuring and its planning, and have heard about like some of the things Iger did to kind of disrupt some of the corrections Lucasfilm and Kathleen want to do. They're seeing all the right things here. Yeah, and then obviously Adam Driver is a big actor, right? I think that's why it's all lined up like that. It's not that we necessarily don't want to see these other actors and their films come to fruition. No, like I think we still do. Maybe not necessarily as like leading individual films, but maybe as supporting characters, maybe as a couple films down the road. But we didn't have anything to this level detailed out with this much momentum, this much hype that was just shut down at the last minute. And this is not just like, oh, this is a thing that happens. Kathleen and Soderbergh talked, and Soderbergh's like, has this ever happened to you? Having a film, what its production greenlit, everything going right, and then being canceled? She's like, this is a first in Lucasfilm history, which is nearly 50 years at this point, right? So yeah, it's not just like, oh, why is it so much more about Kylo or the Kylo movie? It's just the fact that everything lined up so nicely and would still fit super well in this timeline that we are currently living through with Starfighter well into production. And that's just super disappointing. It's now that whiplash of like, it wasn't like it was scattered, it was just so well thought out, and last final step, last final piece of approval, and bam, it's suddenly just no more.
Well, I agree with pretty much everything you said, and but I also do just generally think that Ben Solo is both more interesting than Rey, Finn, or Poe, and a far more compelling character firmly just because of him being a Skywalker. I think all of that, the baggage of that, his turn back, all the things that we see, but like you can turn Vader back without revealing him and who he is because his past ultimately doesn't really matter for the original trilogy to have the arc of Luke redeeming his father, right? It's as much the redemption of Vader is as much of a character moment for Luke as it is for Vader himself. Now that we have the prequels, then it means a lot more as well. But when you see it originally with the first three films, you don't need any more of Vader. He can die because the point was that he had that good in him that only Luke was able to see, and he pulled it out of the worst person in the galaxy. And for Luke, that's a symbol of his character versus who Vader was, right? With Ben, it wasn't like that. You had a backstory that was hinted at and already added to in The Last Jedi. You had a really complicated mix of not planning the stories that made his character feel up and down like a roller coaster. Was he going to turn back? Was he not? Does he make his final decision in The Last Jedi? Does he not? Does he crush his helmet and move on from being the wannabe Vader to, oh no, I need my helmet again? All those types of things. He's just a character that feels just such a roller coaster that I think in general, once he turns back to Ben, you want to have that satisfying moment for him. You want to have those moments where he starts to discover who he is, because kind of the only common thread throughout the entire trilogy for Ben is that he never understands who he is and never believes in Ben himself, not until the very end of The Rise of Skywalker. He's somebody who always wants to be somebody else. And as I've said before in other streams, one of the keys to unlocking everything in the post Return of the Jedi canon Star Wars universe is by talking about how he has to deal with the pressure of being the sole heir to the Skywalker lineage. I think there's so much there that's innately interesting based on, what Star Wars has kind of taught us of the fascination of bloodlines and all of this stuff, right? So losing Ben feels like a huge punch in the gut to that general idea of the bloodlines and the lineage and all of that. And sure, you can have the Rey, adoption, but like it's not the same, especially because I think it would be different if she wasn't Palpatine. The fact that she is Palpatine like makes it a little bit weirder, but also on top of it, it's like innately more interesting, as bad as I was saying, and I kind of said this last week. The idea of the dyad was one of the most fascinating things that the sequel trilogy came up with, even if it was kind of a ham-fisted, like, well, we got to give a reason why The Last Jedi has them have this connection, even though The Last Jedi's reason was that Snoke connected them, and then they kind of stayed connected after that. Um, they come up with the dyad, and I think generally it's a pretty interesting little bit of lore, but we just don't really explore it at all. The idea of being able to explore it after the Rise of Skywalker, having two halves of a whole, a Palpatine and a Skywalker, one who was evil and wanting to be one who's kind of naturally evil and wants to be good, one who's naturally good, wanting to be evil. They both kind of come back into the fold as good guys. All that's so fascinating, and then you kill them off, really, kind of frankly, for no reason, because you really could have just had Rey, beat Palpatine without dying, and then you didn't have to kill him off. But so, like, I think overall Ben is so well liked. I think partly and mostly because it's Adam Driver. That generally it's hard to get an actor of Adam Driver's caliber, especially post Force Awakens. He's been nominated for at least 2 Oscars, if not more. He will probably be an Oscar winner one day. He's that talented and he's that well known. It's hard to get that type of lead with the complicated past, the interesting history, and he's well known to the rest of the world already. I think that's why people are such in an uproar, because you can have people who are generally casual Star Wars fans who have just seen the films say, hey, I'm interested in this because the last Star Wars movie I saw, he died and I didn't really like that he died. You can also have hardcore Star Wars fans who are like, I didn't feel like I got enough out of Ben Solo and I wouldn't like him to not be dead and want to see more. I think overall, just the majority of people are just interested in seeing more from this character. And I think a lot of us felt like we were robbed of more of what Adam Driver could bring to a character like Ben Solo by killing him off at the end of the movie. So I think that's generally why people are interested. But as Badasai says, because Ben is an amazing character, played by one of the best actors of its generation and masterfully, and he is the grandson of Anakin and the son of Han and Leia. No other character has that kind of appeal. They're good, but Ben has the legacy. Ben has the bloodline, and Rey the spirit. Together, they are Skywalkers of the sequel trilogy. You cannot have one without the other. Succeeding Rey is compromised. I think Rey is compromised if Ben doesn't come back. The tragedy of Anakin is not just that Padme died, but rather that he couldn't share a life of family and happiness with her and the children. That's the thing that must be redeemed and healed by Ben and Rey. Is the most compelling story, and honestly one that demands the Star Wars myth. I still think things are going towards 10, 11, and 12. The Last Jedi will be like the hint of what is to come, in the same way that The Rise of Skywalker was kind of a reversion of the characters. And then Badasai says The Rise of Skywalker ends at the gates of adulthood for Rey and Ben. The Last Jedi was the hint of what's beyond, and those get for them. Yeah, I mean, I think you're on the right track. I still absolutely believe 10, 11, and 12 will happen. I've always believed 10, 11, and 12 will happen, even if it wasn't with the sequel trilogy characters for a while, because it seemed like we were not going to bring Ben back, because it seemed like we wanted to push forward with, kind of a different style Rey. I was a little bit more on the like, we don't need to do everything in trilogies. Let's let Rey's movie breathe. Let's let her kind of saga breathe and do as many movies as we want. It doesn't have to be 10, 11, and 12. It can be, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, up to 20. You can do as many as you want. But I do think in this readjusted era of what Disney especially has been doing with Star Wars, they're looking for anything that's bankable. And Star Wars Episode 10 will draw far more box office than a movie just called Star Wars The Hunt for Ben Solo. Maybe that's part of the readjustment here. I mean, I truly do think they have zero plans of making this movie, or had zero plans until he announced this, because he wouldn't reveal it if it was just 50-50. I think they completely and utterly dropped it. But I don't think it's completely dropped anymore. And I do think that 10, 11, and 12 are going to happen. If it is a trilogy they want, why not start with this? The Rey movie is seemingly never going to get off the ground. We haven't heard about it in a long time. It's still in the works, but like, where is the Ray movie when you compare it to this? There's so many questions that need to be answered. And if you're going to bring back Ben, I think you either go a lot of movies without bringing him back, and it's this like journey to bring him back, or you just bring him back right away, pretend the Rise of Skywalker ending kind of doesn't happen anymore, and go with the entire era being a Ray Kylo Ren era, which is kind of what I would prefer because I would like to see Adam Driver in more of these. I think he can bring a gravitas that isn't necessarily there with the rest of the cast. Even if the most interesting parts of a lot of these characters have still yet to be explored.
Yeah, and I think bad as how you were saying the Ray movie would be compromised if Ben doesn't come back. I think that's pretty interesting too because we didn't have any sense of this being a film that was like actually planned and well thought out and bringing back a character. It's like everyone was kind of resigned to being like, yeah, that's kind of it for the character. It sucks, but sure, we'll move on. See what the post sequel era will look like. I mean, you can look at our streams just from like the last 2 months. We're trying to piece together in our own heads like what this Gosling led Starfighter will look like, how that might have a little bit of a characters be part of Rey's New Jedi Order. The New Jedi Order rumors of her being like a tertiary lead to like two lead characters for the longest time that are like more teenage, young adult age, because it is 15 years ahead in the future. Like we were trying to piece together, okay, adjustments here, all this and that, what's Kimber doing and all that. But we didn't realize that a whole entire central piece of the puzzle was, or like not even piece, just like connective bridge, connective tendons for that film were in place with the Hunt for Ben Solo. Because in my mind, I don't think the Hunt for Ben Solo has zero Ray. I think there has to be some level of Ray because again, the dyad, right? Like the force calls have to happen at some point. Even if it's been shut down, where Ray and Ben kind of end up by the end of the Rise of Skywalker when she sees him on Exegol, when she transfers the Skywalker lightsaber to him. Like again, another metaphorical like handing off of like the legacy between them. Like not me right now. Let me deal with the Palpatine legacy. You deal with what the Skywalker would look like with a little bit of solo swagger with the shoulder shrug, right? A lot of great stuff there. And then, obviously they have the kiss and everything. So she's left in a good place that if she suddenly started hearing his voice or starts seeing him in some form, it's not like she'd close the door like she does in The Last Jedi. Right. So I am pretty convinced that the Hunt for Ben Solo would at least feature Daisy Ridley in some capacity too. And that's another crazy thing to think about because if we were the most recent thing we've heard timeline wise still since 2023 Celebration is that it's no longer like 80, 90 years in the future like it was under Lindelof script. It's still Daisy Ridley as the lead. It's 15 years after Rise of Skywalker. We know that Starfighter is going to be like what, a year or so, a couple of years after
Yeah.
everything with the Rise of Skywalker. Now we're like, where does this film? Does she have this immediately after Rise of Skywalker? I don't think so. I think this would be closer to like a 5 to 6, maybe 7, maybe more like a third of the way to the New Jedi Order, maybe halfway through the New Jedi Order. It lets people still have this plan of like, if this doesn't work out, we still can have these new characters show up. We can have a lot of the other sequel leads kind of come up again as supporting characters, maybe co-lead a film in the future here. All this talk about like these different spin-offs and like a little one-offs that they were trying to do to flesh out the sequel post-sequel era, that all still works. And then if you then have it like culminate with this big event of like Ben's coming back, and then the next 5 years can be a totally different thing of integrating him and what the new Jedi Order is going to look like, what influence he has on the galaxy, if at all he's allowed in the majority of the galaxy, stuff like that. Like all of these questions leading into eventually what is the 15-year jump into Rey's New Jedi Order. And we don't really know anything about the villain or anything about how that plot would have gone, but it just feels like that film was designed with Hunt for Ben Solo in mind and for Daisy Ridley to have an appearance there, just like she probably is going to have an appearance at the very end, at least for the Starfighter. So yeah, it is. I don't know if compromise is the right word. I think that might be a little strong. Like I still think it can work without this film, but it does feel like at least the way that these revisions and everything have been going on with the big writers that they have from Lindelof to Stephen Knight to that this now, I think they might have given a name, but nothing officially in the trades of like an unknown writer. it seems like it's because like, oh, the plans were changing all around Hunt for Ben Solo, and once that got jettisoned, it's like, well, now do we have to abandon stuff? Like, was this originally pitched without Hunt for Ben Solo in mind, and then Lindelof, after he handed over to Stephen Knight found out at that same point, like, oh, this is a film that could possibly happen. There, everything's going well. Lucasfilm's told me about this. They want me to integrate some more details. And then as he's finishing his draft, then Iger and Bergman are like, nope, we're gonna kick that to the can. And he's like, well, what can I do to like clean up the script with all the stuff that I've added that now has maybe even taken over large chunks of the story? I can totally see why this film has been compromised by the addition of the Hunt for Ben Solo and the subtraction of the Hunt for Ben Solo, right? And now it's like in this weird fluid state where it's like you're seeing the fandom reaction being so overwhelmingly positive, or not even positive, just like passionate to see what comes out of this. Even if it doesn't work out, even if it's just like another middling film, it's a film that is way more enticing than a return to theaters like The Mandalorian Grogu is going to be. And it's not reliant on like a Ryan Gosling-esque character taking the lead, memes kind of coming out of it, like all these big name actors, right? This is a auteur director, with a critical and commercially viable star actor that would have been a great, great, great central piece to this post sequel era. And now it's like, how does it go from here, right? It makes everything kind of get a little worse in hindsight. Like all my hype for Starfighter is still there because we're seeing things, we're hearing stuff, but the idea of like maybe like a Adam Driver, Ben Solo redeemed, having like a buddy cop adventure with Ryan Gosling, helping out on with like some Starfighter mission, like his own version of a solo command, but a little bit more force led or something in the unknown regions. Like even if that was like a book or something, just the idea that that stuff could happen, right? And it was almost like working up towards something like that, and now it's like, well, maybe not. That kind of makes me feel like, oh, how excited am I going to be for all these other projects that they're working on if I know that like the beating heart of it is kind of like jettisoned right now, and the the big final milestone in New Jedi Order might be pushed back further and further because they've lost such a central cog for it. So yeah, maybe compromise might be a little too strong, but I do think it's definitely a fitting word that you put here.
I think in general, though, what we have to see and how this all comes out of it is just like with these rewrites, with what's going on right now. Because yeah, the writer you were thinking of, George Nolfi, was the one who was hired like a year ago to continue the Ray script. With all that going on now, is it feasible to put Adam Driver back in this story? Or now, I think the way you have to do it is it has to take place before the Ray movie, or you could change and adjust the Hunt for Ben Solo to take place after, right? But it does throw a lot of wrinkles in just kind of everything they're doing, and I would not be shocked if the reason these movies have all been delayed is purely because of this movie not specifically happening. But then again, you go, why would you announce the Ray movie if it was so dependent on a movie that you canceled? Like there's a lot of things that just don't make sense still about the whole story. So, and Badasai's giving a lot of interesting commentary as well in the chat about kind of the structure and what you would see with this whole story. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Badasai. I think where I differ is that I don't think the whole franchise should end after a hypothetical 12. What I think is that Star Wars, obviously the galaxy will never end. You can end the numbered movies, and I think you kind of have to do that. And that's why I would be hesitant to say that they are making 10, 11, and 12. But just from like a business perspective, I think they're going to call whatever next movie stars Rey or Kylo episode 10, because I think they're going to not make as much from Mandalorian and Grogu and Starfighter. And then they're going to have to decide, okay, what superficial reasons are why we're not making as much. It can't possibly be the film quality. It can't possibly be because people didn't ask for certain movies. It's got to be because they're superficial things. And they're going to convince themselves that it's because they didn't call the movie episode 10. And then I think eventually you're going to start getting movies that are numbered that have nothing to do with the main Skywalker saga, just because they're going to say, well, people will go if they're numbered more so than if they're not. Um, So I don't think the movie's going to end after 12. And I don't think it has to. I mean, we've seen from Star Wars Legends that you can do a ton of stories without the specific repeat, like you said, of The Force Awakens. Like, you don't have to do the similar Star Wars arc. It's just kind of a matter of whether they have the guts to take swings on things that aren't the Star Wars people are familiar with. Do they have the guts to take a swing on creating new villains, creating new ideas and new concepts for villains in Star Wars? Or do they feel like, well, we've got to have stormtroopers because that's what people know. We've got to have red and blue lightsabers because that's what people know. If they're willing to take swings, you can tell endless stories. But I do agree that at some point it will be hard to continue with the next generation, next generation, next generation. At some point you will, when you kind of retire the Rey character, the Kylo Ren character, the Finn character, when those actors are done and when they get to a certain age where they want to be done, at some point you are going to have to move on. And that's why I do think the best way to move on is to do, at the very minimum, a legacy-esque jump, but even more so like a super far away jump, and just kind of tell a Star Wars that's wholly different than what we've seen before. That's, I've always said, the far past or far future is the best place for them to go for starting and continuing Star Wars stories, because you can do kind of whatever you want without having the controversy of what came before in Legends and what you're having to do with characters that people may or may not like already right now with the sequels. But I do think there's a lot of thematic richness in at least completing the arc with a 10, 11, and 12. And so if you are right about Asai and that's what they want to do, maybe complete and put a capper on 9, because in a lot of ways, 9 tries to be a wrap up, but it really just kind of opens up a whole other can of worms by doing so. And it becomes an unsatisfying ending because it wraps up things that weren't even really in the sequels as much as they were like Star Wars things overall with Palpatine, right? So you've got a wrap up for Palpatine and another wrap up for Palpatine. But then, what about the First Order structure? What about all the other First Order ships that aren't on the planet? What about the politics? What about the power vacuum between the fact that the New Republic was completely destroyed and you have this only tiny little band of leaders in the Resistance? Like, all these things that you would think would actually be answered in the final film weren't answered at all. And so, at least with Return of the Jedi, the main weapon, the main leader, all of them were destroyed. The rebellion had a strong central leadership and government kind of forming. There was a lot of stuff to pull from for, like, okay, we can see why the rebellion would save the day. Right now, like, in the Rise of Skywalker, the resistance is as low as it's gotten in forever, right? There's nobody to lead and they just lost Leia. So where does it go? I think a lot of that stuff is the most interesting. It's why a capper for the post Rise of Skywalker era would be much needed if you want to help save those movies. But it just kind of is one of those things that, like, so because it's such an open ended book, you can really go any direction. But the core of what Star Wars is the lineage and the families. If you're going to number them, I think you do have to go with Rey and Kylo. Let's see what Badasai is saying. I'm not sure if I'll read all of yours on stream. I've been scrubbing through what you were saying. That aside, I'll pick up from what the comment I referenced, which was, in my opinion, the whole franchise should end with 12, like Lord of the Rings has a definitive ending. Otherwise, you go on and basically just repeat, yes, new characters, but basically repetition and structure like Force Awakens, corruption of institutions, purges, etc. It would cheapen the whole Star Wars franchise. Eventually, the future, in my opinion, is actually going back and in between, knowing that at the end, you have your happy end. And besides, who is hunting for Ben Solo? It has to be Rey. What Rise of Skywalker and the sequels opens is the Vergences, Exegol, Octu, time and space, world between worlds, mystic themes, spiritual themes, etc. I'm not sure what you mean by that last comment. I mean, I understand the additions to Exegol and Octu, the Vergence on Octu, but the world between worlds, none of that stuff is referenced really. at all in The Rise of Skywalker. If you want to say the voices at the end is where you're getting that, maybe. Um, I would argue the sequels are far less spiritual than the prequels. They're a little more spiritual than the originals, but a lot of that spirituality comes from the last movie. They're very much so not steeped in like prequel Star Wars mysticism until The Rise of Skywalker. And really that's more of a case of just trying to introduce Palpatine back into the story and come up with reasons why he's alive. Um, but the what I kind of agree and disagree on with you is that I agree that Rey would be probably somebody hunting for Ben Solo. Ben Solo, I also think it could be an internal strife. I mean, we haven't seen really any character-driven Star Wars movies ever. You could argue Solo, but I mean, it's kind of a best of, less of a character study. If the hunt for Ben Solo is truly a character study, that opens up so many pathways for not just redemption for that specific character, but the continued build of each character. It makes it more interesting to have a Rey movie because if you're able to break down these characters in each subsequent film, you're able to set them up in a place to where if a galactic conflict comes, they now have the room to grow and learn in those battles and less so to define themselves as people. And I think identity is a huge part of the sequel trilogy, and it's something that's kind of lacking, to be honest, in the way it ends. They all have a kind of a title. By the time the movie's over, you've got Rey adopting Skywalker, you got Ben choosing to come back to the light, you got Finn and Poe choosing to be generals. But ultimately, none of the things that I think at the core of each character are really resolved. When you have, Ben die, you don't get to see him juggle with the weight of the fact that his mom died. You don't get to see him juggle with the weight of killing his father and Luke all dying, everybody dying, and now the one thing he didn't want to happen, the pressure of being the last Skywalker, all that's off him because he's gone now, right? Rey choosing her path. She doesn't get to see. We don't get to see what the ramifications are if the galaxy finds out she's the heir to Palpatine. Finn never gets to have his redemption. Poe never gets to have his redemption. And so, if you do these character studies, I think it's a way. Obviously a way to redeem so many of these characters and build that out before you dive into the headlong events. But you need to come up with what I think is that you kind of need both. You can't try to combine them all into one thing again because that ultimately didn't work in the sequels. We were too scattershot. So you kind of need these specific standalone origin movies almost before you do your Avengers, which are like the 10, 11, and 12 for lack of a better word, because those movies need to have conflict. Those new movies need to deliver on what a numbered Star Wars movie might be. The rest of your stories need to create the Finn, Poe, Kylo, and Rey that we all kind of knew. And so I think the hunt for Ben Solo is a nice step for that, but I don't know if it's necessarily episode 10 unless they force it to be, which is very much so a likelihood because they know it'll make a lot more money.
Yeah, yeah. And bad aside, I'm loving the energy, man. I
Yeah,
don't know if I can
definitely.
I can keep up with all of this. I'll pick up on the same comment Liam said about who's hunting for Ben Solo. Yeah, I don't think it has to be kind of be Ray for sure. She's the only one that has like a direct connection to him of sorts. Who else could it be? I mean, it'd be pretty interesting if we got to see other Jedi of this era start popping their heads up, right? Like maybe people from like it'd be great if like we could have a Luke Skywalker Academy student that wasn't affected or killed by Ben or the lightning and everything that was happening that destroyed the temple was maybe off world that Ben retroactively was pretty close to in his earlier days before they went their separate paths or something. And he can become a bigger character. Again, I always want Finn and Rey to still have that dynamic that they have in The Force Awakens. It's such great energy. It's not necessarily romantic or anything, but it is like a very closeness that Nine sort of gets close to, but still doesn't really ever truly hit again because, again, Rey is very much in her head and she's dealing with a lot that needed a 3-hour film to really flesh out for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting what you're saying about the next one with Rise of Skywalker and sequels opens and Vergences, Exegol. Yeah, I mean, I do think, and I brought it up on our streams before. There is a very fantastical element to the Force that isn't necessarily there in the much more grounded original trilogy and the much more like politically restrictive, usage of the Force in prequels, right? Like they have such martial function in the prequels, but they're not necessarily like using such great feats of the Force like they are a little bit more so in the sequels, and they don't necessarily have a dyad that is like a literal thing versus prophecies and old ancient texts and stuff that can be manipulated and stuff that can be misread, as Mace Windu says, right? So that's one thing that I think a lot of like Bantam era and New Jedi Order era of the EU really got into a little bit more of like how can we open up our explanations of the Force and just Force powers. Obviously, a lot of it's more based on science fiction books and science space fantasy that inspired Star Wars. But as we got later into stuff, right, especially with Fate of the Jedi, retracing the steps of Jason Solo on his travels after New Jedi Order, before Legacy of the Force, before Dark Nest Crisis, and all that, we do see some really interesting like usage of the Force, like flow walking and everything is such a huge part of Legacy of the Force. And I've always loved stuff like that that became a little bit more ambitious about how they use the Force, not necessarily like like destructive usage, but more of like what does it open up, what does it make you think. It doesn't have to be world between worlds, right? That's always been something that's like, is it time travel, is it not, for some people? But stuff that can like make you be like, whoa, what is the extent of the Force, how can other people use it, and all that. So I'd love to see that. I'd love to see vergences, especially after, you know, the incompleteness of the versions and how what we're probably not going to see for a long, long time with the ending of Acolyte with May and Osha. I'd like to see how more vergences look like besides just the Dagobah cave and stuff like that, besides the Acto like underwater cave and everything. I want to see more things like that. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the post sequel era continue to explore for all these Jedi and these characters. So in a way, maybe Finn can get something like that, or maybe Finn is a little bit more of the grounded, martial focused Jedi that stays a little bit behind in the galaxies, trying to cleanse the Force and like cleanse the brainwashing of First Order troopers, trying to cleanse the bad name of like people who were Force sensitive but kind of come from the wrong place, right? As a lot of First Order troopers would definitely be looked at as, especially with it being an insurgency force. You can make Rey and Finn be very different Jedi. You can have Luke Skywalker's Jedi have a role in it. I don't know which Order 66 Jedi would pop in at this time. That'd be pretty interesting. I don't know if a Mandalorian Grogu is necessarily going to be someone tied into stuff that's happening with Rey and all that, but I'd love to see someone of Yoda species actually have some really crazy explorations of the Force too, not just being like, "Hey, cool armor, buddy," like cool way of talking, cool usages of weapons and stuff like that. Like I think you don't just bring a Yoda simply for cuteness. I think you're also trying to say like this character in the future has potential for vast usage of the Force and exploration of the Force. So that's one thing I've liked really about the sequels, even if the storytelling execution was not always there. I really did appreciate that. Like it made it seem like there was a huge exploration, expansion to the Force once more that was muted, unfortunately, during Luke Skywalker's era, but something about Palpatine's revival, something about the dyad, everything kind of clicked to a different gear, and in a way it would tie into a lot of what you're saying about it. So this being like finally achieving where prequel Anakin could have gone, what prequel Anakin could have achieved if he had a better mental state, if he had a better support group, if he didn't fall to his worst urges, right, and was able to actually explore these things in the Force and explore the fullest potential. This be a great way for the Skywalkers to actually fulfill their potential, their proper legacy. But would we then lead into like Rey and Kylo having a kid, right? And becoming a new Skywalker for 10, 11, 12? Or are they just the elder statesmen by the time 10, 11, 12 come out and then they fade away? So that way the Skywalkers have like a proper conclusion without death in play. I don't know. There's a lot to be considered here, but whatever happens with 10, 11, 12, if it is something that does happen, I do think the Skywalkers have to end to some degree in 12, not necessarily by death, like I'm saying, but they have to almost like disconnect from the galaxy. And I think it'd be a really nice way to like send it off all the way back to episode 1 with young Anakin always talking about dreaming about wanting to visit every single planet and explore the Forest with Qui-Gon and all. It'd be great if like that's how they almost like retired. Like disconnecting themselves from a galaxy based destiny, right? Like if they could just be like, no, it's just the force and nothing else, and you guys can handle the rest. We've done our part, right? That's how I'd like it to end personally, because I think that's a fulfillment of like what Kid Anakin wanted. And I think that's the Skywalkers were meant to walk amongst the stars, right? And in the most beautiful way. That's how I've always looked at it. And unfortunately, we have the Skywalker saga to show that that doesn't really happen, because old politicians with dark side powers really don't think that's a great career choice, and instead want to make you a crazy monster.
Well, we've talked for an hour now about the Ben Solo story again, and it is continually fascinating, and it will remain so. I'm sure it'll be one of the biggest topics of conversation on these lives every week for a good long while. But we have a few other stories that I would like to get to real quick before we move on to mostly your guys' questions, and we have a lot of questions to get through tonight. So let's talk about David Fincher real quick, and it kind of ties all back into this because this was a drop from Jeff Snyder, who's one of those leakers who often has a lot of really good scoops on his newsletter. And he decided to drop this bit of information last week after the hype around the Ben Solo movie was running. And he dropped that David Fincher approached Lucasfilm to pitch a script for Star Wars, not a script, an idea for Star Wars that was ultimately turned down as well. Jeff Snyder broke in his newsletter that the iconic director was also working with Lucasfilm developing an idea. He didn't reveal too many details other than the story would have been set after the events of The Rise of Skywalker and focused on a character from that movie, though we don't know which one. The project would have been his idea, but negotiations fell through as the director asked for final cut, something that Lucasfilm was not willing to concede. It's unclear how far the development process for the movie was, though for starters, Fincher is not a writer, so someone else would have had to pen the script. So it is yet another high profile director. I mean, I would definitely say Fincher is, to the common person, even more popular and more well known than Steven Soderbergh. And this one is fascinating as well. Fincher was kind of an intern. I'm not sure what role. He had a small role on the production of Return of the Jedi, and that was one of the things that got him into the movie industry. Then he was obviously famously a music video director before he ended up getting hired to direct Alien 3, which he absolutely despised, and then moved mostly into original work. This would be his first return to franchise filmmaking, something he's oftentimes swore he would never do again, which hence the reason this all fell through for Final Cut. um, but it is interesting, and it also just continues to beg the question. And I think continuing to talk about not just Ben Solo, but the outside forces of this story. Star Wars, as I've said so many times, as we all know, is so multi-generational. It's so inherently ingrained into so many people, not just people our age who grew up with the prequels, not people David Fincher's age who grew up with the originals. Now another generation is growing up with the Mandalorian or the sequels. But it's something that just, it's an iconography, it's style of storytelling, the myth, the root of childlike good versus evil storytelling that George Lucas wanted to bring. It's inherent in pretty much any storyteller. And I think it's something that's easily accessible to a lot of people and something they oftentimes were inspired by and wanted to think about when they were learning to tell stories. And it's fascinating to see these names just involved with Star Wars because it's not shocking. And I don't think really Lucasfilm should be vilified for the idea of not giving final cut. It's what you would expect pretty much any major studio to do with any major IP. But it still continues to beg the question of like, should they consider that for the future? Should they consider on special projects giving final cut to some of these directors? Because there's obviously interest and passion there for so many of them. If somebody like David Fincher, who was adamant for years, for almost 30 years, that he was never going to work with studios again on big budget franchises because of his experience with Alien 3. And he decides, hey, I'll take a risk and pitch a Star Wars movie. I think that's you're at the point now, and especially at the point with Star Wars storytelling, regardless of what happens with Ben, regardless of what happens with Rey, you're at the point with Star Wars storytelling where you continue to need hits, you continue to need new ideas, fresh directions. If I'm Star Wars, I'm taking the risk on something like this. Whether I'd give them final cut, or at least say, hey, you know, you can have you can have final cut, but you have to, have a lot of other measures in place that make you work within the confines of what we want you to do. But I would take that risk on these names because that's the type of thing that gets Star Wars back into the consciousness. That's the thing that gets Star Wars back into not just moviegoers' minds, but the critical circles that Star Wars kind of was in for a long time. And Star Wars being a film first major franchise, something that wasn't inspired by a book, wasn't inspired by a comic book, it will always have that level of prestige and love amongst film people that other franchises don't necessarily get. And I think when you have that, for the future of Star Wars, I'd play up on it. And if somebody like David Fincher wants to make a Star Wars movie, unless it completely breaks the universe and breaks the lore, I'm saying yes almost every time, because I think that is something that, like Soderbergh with Adam Driver making a Hunt for Ben Solo movie, that's something that becomes must watch. Whether it's horrible and a train wreck, whether it's just disappointing, or whether it's the next great Star Wars movie, I think to people around the world, whether you're a fan or not, that becomes a must watch movie. You have to see what is Fincher going to do with Star Wars. So this is a really interesting thing that it fell through. I mean, obviously it wasn't as deep as The Hunt for Ben Solo, so this likely will never happen. And it won't get the same push and buzz like The Hunt for Ben Solo, because as famous as Fincher is, he's not Adam Driver. He doesn't already exist in this franchise. But almost more than A Hunt for Ben Solo, I kind of want to know what this was. I would kind of want to see this even more than Hunt for Ben Solo. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Sonic?
It's a weird feeling, like reading a title saying David Fincher's failed Star Wars film, right? And you're like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean failed? Like, what do you mean Star Wars film, right? And yeah, I know the final cut thing is kind of where this probably ends altogether, and there really isn't much else to say. But I think we also take into consideration the fact that, this presumably, from what we have context clues wise, would have been with a sequel era character from what other reports have been telling, and would have been after episode 9. It seems like for some reason, right, like Lucasfilm is not just doubling down on the sequel era, they're trying to like explode it. All right. And now they're just struggling to like contain what that means. It's like they've sold like a huge sandbox to everybody, but they're like, well, it's not actually truly a sandbox, right? We still have the final say. We still have the story group that needs to be better involved and better utilized. I think that's a thing we can all agree on, especially even with Filoni in charge, like especially more so because he likes to tread on other people's works or make confusing detail changes. But I digress. But regardless, looking at this and a little bit more about the leaked emails with him and Amy Pascal of Sony, right? It's like, oh, he doesn't like Adam Driver as an actor. He was always saying, he was telling like in his emails, like, I don't see how he can handle and characterize that character, that sort of character that will eventually be put to fruition by him pretty well, I'd argue. But he was not a fan of Adam Driver. He was like very against him being a Skywalker heir, right? And it was pretty interesting to read. So we know it wouldn't have been Ben Solo. Would it be Rey? Probably not. I'd be very surprising for them to be like, hey, we're gonna make 2 Rey films. One's New Jedi Order and one's like this. So I don't think it's Rey. Now, could it be Finn or Poe? I think, yeah, I think Finn would be very exciting. And for why this is happening, I don't think it's just because he's simply like a PA/intern on Return of the Jedi and that left him with such great memories. Because if you look at like stuff like Light and Magic, a lot of people who were working on Return of the Jedi, they're like happy to be done with it because it was so straining. It was so much more fast paced, so much more model based. Original plans for Kashyyyk turned into Endor and all that. Like it was a lot more of a stressful film than seven, 4 and 5 were, despite all the problems that were like more like notable, like the Tunisia set, like being run over, just the snow on Hoth and everything that taking place to start with the filming of like the first half of Empire Strikes Back, right? So I don't think it's because of that. I think he would probably have a little bit more of a critical eye as he's gotten older about that experience. Just happy to say that he worked on the last big Star Wars film trilogy ender that was pretty well acclaimed, even if I personally don't agree. But regardless, um, I don't think it's that. I think it's the fact that he is now much older and he has now also changed his tune on how he makes his films. Like this is a guy who is just making independent film in his own way. He hated Alien 3, the franchise experience. He was locked out of Final Cut, and that's kind of forced him to be in like telling people like I always want Final Cut on every film that he's made. His second film was Seven. That's a crazy second film to have right after Alien 3, and it was huge for him. I don't really love the first half of Seven personally, but I can admit that it's still a super great film. And then obviously Fight Club. Once you make a Fight Club, you kind of get to do anything you want, right? And he's had a pretty good run for a while. And one of my favorite films ever is Zodiac. I absolutely love the hell out of that film. But he's become a very interesting filmmaker in recent time because he was kind of show running Mindhunter. And, he said Netflix said it was way too expensive to go for a third and final season. And that was like a very interesting, like, change in like how he worked as a creative for like almost 20 plus years and still kind of kept to like a lot of his way of filmmaking, his principles, his kind of themes and everything. It was pretty interesting to see that pivot for him. And then, that gets canceled. Everyone still clamors for at least a Mindhunter film or something to come out, and that just doesn't seem to be happening. But he's been doing like a lot of these Netflix release films. Like he has like an exclusive Netflix contract. And then the most recent crazy thing for him to happen, well, he's doing the sequel to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a Tarantino film, and he's doing a sequel for it, and it's about Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt's character. Obviously they have that working relationship, but it's just such a strange thing. Tarantino, correct me if I'm wrong, has never had a sequel to any of his movies, and for this sequel to be helmed
Just
not
had
by
Kill
him.
Bill.
Okay,
But
yeah,
this
but that's
one,
like
yeah,
part one,
one
part
year.
two, right?
Yeah.
That's one collective story. This is like you could Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does not really need a sequel, but we're getting the
Yeah.
Adventures of Cliff Booth on Netflix, which was like always kind of teased like a little fun like series or something. But we're getting a movie, not from Tarantino, not a series from Tarantino. We're getting a freaking movie directed sequel by David Fincher. So I think this is a guy who, at this point in his career, has done everything that he possibly could have wanted to. But now he's like, I want to be more ambitious as this industry is rapidly changing. I think there's this part of like he's not a filmmaker like a Wes Anderson that has like a billionaire allowing him to make the same kind of style of film every single time, right? He's always been someone who's jumped across different genres, jumped across a little bit darker themes, sure, but still relatively different films between each on entry. He hasn't done something super crazy unique and different since, and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which was a very, very different film from the rest of his work. I think he thought this might be something cool to put in his portfolio, but that whole issue came into like, hey, this is gonna be post episode 9. You promised Sandbox. It's not really Sandbox. The character I want to use may not necessarily have a super willing actor to come back. Maybe he'll come back because of me. We'll see what happens there. But if you're not gonna give me the final cut here, I'm out. Right? He's in this weird transition period. I think maybe a Fincher in 10 years probably takes this film, right? And is like, yeah, I'm a little older. I'm getting a little closer up in age for me and what my remaining works will look like. And he probably is like, yeah, I'll go for a Star Wars film. But now he's still like, I'm in like the relative still extended prime of my directing career. I still want to do more stuff here. So I think hearing that he can't get the final cut in a timeline that should be totally open ended is probably what shut it down, and it kind of goes back to his like initial trauma in the industry with everything with Alien 3 and being locked out of the editing room and all that. But yeah, it's just a weird thing just seeing like how his directing career has really transformed in the last like 5 to 8 years. It's just so different from what he was doing before, and
Mhm.
now we're looking at it like, hey, we were so close to maybe something like this taking place around the same time as the Hunt for Ben Solo, the ups and downs of the New Jedi Order Rey film, Starfighter being led by a workhorse like Sean Levy, who's just coming off of 4 great seasons of Stranger Things, hopefully lands it with season 5 Stranger Things. It's like a very strange sandbox. Like everybody is kind of jumping in right now. And Fincher throwing his hat in there into the ring, like super exciting. And it's just the idea that he'd come back after being such a like a non-franchise guy, like a non like big budget filmmaker for so long in his career. For him to be like, yeah, even I have to consider it when like all these things are on the table, except for that one thing that he always will need, which is his, sorry, my light fell, guys. His final cut. Yeah, it's just it's so weird. It's so sad, but I think it's maybe for the best because he's certainly got a style that I don't think necessarily works for post episode 9 personally.
Yeah, well, especially with like, I don't know if he could do a Poe movie. I feel like it has to be Finn if you're talking about one of the main characters, unless he's like, I'm gonna take this random guy in the background and make a movie about him. Then okay, that's interesting. I'll go with that. And again, like I completely understand why Lucasfilm would want to not give him final cut, especially if it's on one of your main 4 characters who you might, continue to flesh out and build with post Rise of Skywalker. But I think as a studio, if you're going to be approached by these prolific filmmakers, especially in a like I can see in 2015, right? Star Wars at that point was seemingly in the gutter. A lot of people didn't like the prequels. General word out there and social media was prequel hate. Clone Wars had wrapped up. You're trying for a fresh start. Rebels comes out, people really enjoyed it. Force Awakens comes out. It was a huge hit. Rogue One comes out, it's a huge hit as well. I think you're more picky then. Right now, you haven't had a Star Wars movie in theaters in 7 years. You really struggled to get a Star Wars movie off the ground. When somebody like David Fincher comes up and he's asking for final cut, and you know that his track record's incredible, and it's not like me walking in there and saying, "Well, yeah, I mean, I'll do a Star Wars movie, but I want final cut." And they're like, "No, you haven't directed a movie on this level before, no way." You know, with when it's David Fincher, you're like, "Okay, I think we can I understand not wanting to give it to him because you gotta control the whole property, but it's David Fincher. I think you consider it." And I think that again begs the question moving forward. If David Fincher is approaching, if Soderbergh's approaching, what other filmmakers are prolific right now? I mean, we've heard Christopher Nolan talk about his love for Star Wars. We've heard Denis Villeneuve talk about his love for Star Wars. Christopher Nolan walks up and says, "I want to do a Star Wars movie," and he says, "I want final cut." Are you saying no? Sorry, we don't give final cut out. I mean, I think that's where as a franchise that's floundering a little bit, trying to find its footing, trying to become a big theatrical franchise again. You've got to start considering, okay, if we get offered by certain people, I know once you do it once, you set the precedent, right? But like, if we get offered by certain people, we're kind of in the position of like, we don't really have any specific stories going right now. We don't have anything really happening in Star Wars. Let's make a Star Wars movie with David Fincher. I mean, the when Tarantino was on board to make a or not on board, but like talking about making a Star Trek movie, I think most people were like, I'm not sure about that. But all those people would have gone and seen it just to see what it was. And I think Fincher directing a Star Wars movie is kind of in that same vein. It's just like, what is this and what are we gonna get out of it? And I think Star Wars, considering it has so many different time periods, so many different eras, so many things going on, I think you got to say, hey, David, maybe post Rise of Skywalker, we won't give final cut, but we'll give final cut to you if you want to tell a story in the Old Republic, or give final cut to you if you want us to tell a story between episode 3 and 4, certain things like that. We'd love you to be a part of Star Wars, but that's the one period we got to really kind of control. I think you open the door for so many filmmakers to come, because that same passion isn't there for Marvel or DC or like other franchises that aren't film first franchises, and franchises that have existed across so many generations. Star Wars is almost 50 years old. Everybody working in the film industry right now has been influenced by Star Wars in some capacity, and especially those guys who are in their like 30s to 60s, because a lot of them are either a part of the industry or were coming up in the industry as Star Wars was coming out, or were young and saw Star Wars for the first time as a child, and it influenced them. So yeah, just kind of an interesting thought experiment moving forward. Will Star Wars ever be willing to work with these high profile directors? I would love it if they actually did, and we got more Star Wars movies, more variety because of that. So now we're going to turn it over to your guys' questions. We have a few other topics we can discuss, but I know we have a lot of questions piling up, and we've had some great discussion tonight about Ben Solo and then now David Fincher. But let us know what you guys thought about those stories in the comments. And again, keep firing in those chats. We are going to go through as many as we can right now for about the next 30 minutes. If you want to guarantee you get one on tonight's stream, send in a super chat. Greatly helps out our channel, and you get bumped up to the top. We'll answer your question immediately. We have more people watching right now than have hit the like button, so please scroll down, hit the like button. It's really easy to do, helps out our channel a lot. And make sure you subscribe if you're new. Join us every week as we do this every single Tuesday. You can look forward to some other stuff coming out throughout the week. We have Visions dropping tomorrow, and we are still kind of figuring out exactly how we're going to cover that. We threw out doing a live stream to talk about it with you guys if you're interested in Visions Live. We also have talked about doing some reviews for some of the more interesting episodes, or some of the episodes that, like the dual sequel that Anthony's bringing up here in the chat, that are a little bit more popular. Let us know in the chat right now if you're interested in certain Visions coverage. We will be covering it in some fashion and probably make a few videos out of it, but we're going to have some of that out for the rest of the week. We're also recording our Last Order review right after this stream, and then we are going to have our Master of Evil review within the next week or two as well. We just got our review copy of that. I'm very excited to fully dive into that story as well. So keep an eye out on the channel for all of that great stuff coming soon. All right, let's scroll back to the top here. Anthony says, glad to see that Visions is having a season 3 and that we are seeing the return of the Ronin. The Duel was my favorite short. It was interesting to a former Sith as the good guy. I think, yeah, to turn a former Sith as a good guy. Does that make him a sort of grayish Sith or light Sith? Also, what do you think about George, or what do you think George Lucas feels about Visions? I think he may very well love it, as he has always been a fan of Japanese culture. Well, thanks for those comments. I really loved the Duel as well. It was in my top 3 or 4 of season 1. I think visually it was really impressive, fun, interesting kind of what if story. Never read the Ronin book, but I am excited to see what they do here, if they go even bigger and badder with this sequel. As for what type of Sith it makes him, I mean, I think I would say he's not really even a Sith anymore if he's redeemed, right? Again, didn't read the Ronin book, so I'm not really sure his full story. But like we've talked about in the past, like the idea of gray Jedi is hard enough. I think a light Sith or a gray Sith kind of is the antithesis of everything that is Sith. So you couldn't really, unless you were the Sith race, which is in Star Wars, unless you were the Sith race, you couldn't really be a light Sith because the entire Sith methodology revolves around the dark side. I think whereas like there's nothing in the Sith methodology that could be used with the light side of the Force, really. When it comes to the Jedi, I still don't think gray Jedi is a great idea, but I think when it comes to like a dark Jedi or something, you can have dark tendencies but still be out for the kind of the good of all people, like a Jedi is. You can follow the kind of moral philosophies of the Jedi while acting under the Sith, and so I think that can kind of create a dark Jedi type feel, but I really don't think there can be a light Sith. That's a side note. As for what does George think about this, I think he would enjoy it. I think George is, in the stuff we've seen him greenlight when he was head of Lucasfilm, he seemed to always be somebody who was pro riffing on Star Wars. He's whether it was the EU, books, comics, video games, whether it was something like Detours, which never came out, a comedy series, whether it was giving the rights up to Robot Chicken or Family Guy or all these spoof shows, whether it was even the Clone Wars or Star Wars Clone Wars that took, kind of his ideas and in Tartakovsky's case really made them more bombastic and more explosive, which I think I would liken a little bit more towards Visions. And then in Clone Wars case, they came up with a lot of new lore as well. He was a part of that writing team. He seems to be somebody who's always enjoyed riffing on Star Wars. I think where he gets a little more sensitive in the interviews and stuff we've seen from him is when you take his characters and you're like officially continuing the story. I think anything that kind of riffs and especially is not canon, he would really enjoy. And like you said, Anthony, mixing that with the Japanese culture, especially with the samurai culture that absolutely inspired so much of what Star Wars is and a lot of the mysticism around Star Wars as well as the aesthetic. I think he would really enjoy all of that. So yeah, hopefully he has seen Visions and is a fan of it.
Yeah, I like Visions as exploration of what Star Wars can be, what it reflects back onto its influences, what new combinations can be made. Like Star Wars is always like that extra paint layer of paint that's put onto like a nice blend of different genres, of different ideas that pop up every couple of years in film industry. Even if people say like, film is dying, creativity is dying, that's not true, right? Because Star Wars has always been able to like riff on stuff that has constantly reshaped, constantly retransformed how we look at like filmmaking, how we look at our characters and storytelling methods, right? So I like what Visions has done. Volume 1 was definitely more fun than 2 for me. I'm not a huge fan of the duel. I think it's pretty good, but yeah, I think I love the animation of it. I just found that the Ronin character was like, okay, it's very Mifune and Yojimbo inspired, but like turned dark, but not quite dark, right? And I like that. I'm looking forward to the sequel. I'm hoping that my thoughts, because I haven't really seen it in like 3 years, to be honest, has like changed and into a little bit more positive regard when I rewatch it later tonight or like tomorrow before it drops and I get to see volume 3 and its sequel. But yeah, I think it's a cool, fun thing. Like you were saying, Liam, Lucas, when he was in charge of all this, was willing to see like what people could do with Star Wars. And this is a great example of that, to be like, hey, I want to make a samurai Star Wars, right? The inspiration and kind of flip it on its head and have, this instead of a Star Wars paint job on this storytelling vehicle, have a samurai paint job on the Star Wars storytelling, right? And I think it's pretty cool for sure. I'm excited what happens there. I'm hoping I like the second one even more than the first, so there's like a nice build up, and maybe there's a chance to like go past a little bit more of like the negative reviews of the Ronin book that even people who love the duel were like, I don't really care for this book. I kind of want to see them continue with a sequel animation, and we are finally getting that. So I'm looking forward to stuff like that. Um, but yeah, as far as like light sit, stuff like that, like I don't know, like he's a Ronin, right? And we've had Ronin Jedi, Boken Jedi, as talked about in Ahsoka, describing Ahsoka by Thrawn. We've kind of had the role of a Ronin already kind of be defined as part of like at least Force users have some sort of understanding, that it's not living to like someone's specific code. It's like, being out there, outcasted, but like trying to do what's right. And that's kind of what the Ronin is doing. I wouldn't say he's a dark sider like the same way as he was before. He's killing all these other people that were part of his Sith rebellion that he kind of got disillusioned with, right? And he's trying to cleanse like his mistakes. Does that necessarily make him better? I don't know. He doesn't really choose to be good, right? He's just kind of more like, I just want to eliminate the cancer that I caused in some ways. That's kind of how I've always read that character. But again, it's been a long time since I watched it. I can't really say I know 100% for sure, but gray Sith or light Sith, I don't think it's anything like that. It's just more. I mean, plenty of Sith just backstab each other. It's a very common thing once you have more like one Sith or Sith armies around. Like it's all like backstabbing, taking over, making power grabs. Making deals with each other. This just kind of seems like an example of like, okay, well, maybe I don't really like what I did, and I'm gonna try to undo it. But who's to say that he won't like go in a little bit more of a darker way that's a little bit more satisfying to him, right? Like this is just a example of a character being like, yeah, that's not exactly what I pictured. So let me try, you know, undo it as much as I can and see what I can do moving forward, right? That's kind of how I look at him. So is that make him more of a light Sith for you? Maybe, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that. But I I think once we come to the fact that this is Visions and not canon Star Wars, is not like main timeline Star Wars storytelling, it's we're not talking about the same things as like bleeding crystals and like undoing that. I don't think we've ever really seen an unblood crystal outside of like comics and stuff like that. So this doesn't look like a character that would even be aware of that possibility. This doesn't seem like a concern of like the Japanese creators, right? It's just more to take the aesthetics and put a samurai paint job on Star Wars storytelling and having fun with it. So enjoy it for what it is, as like a cool exploration of like what Star Wars can be with other cultures. Once we start asking these questions like light Sith or gray Sith, it's like now we're trying to play it to the playbook that is there in Star Wars, like the rules and the weight and the factors that affects the storytelling, like of someone like a Fincher and him getting final cut and what he can do, right? Where that can actually shape how everybody looks at general Star Wars. This, because it's animation, will always kind of be niche, and this being like a animated short will be further niche. So I don't think they're really thinking about concepts like that, but it's fun to discuss.
Critical Thinker's next question was, besides Zahn, who would you have picked to write Force Heretic instead of Dix and Williams? That's a tough question. I mean, in general, we've been sitting with those books forever, so it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know who I would have picked in hindsight. I think Lucino would have been interesting for those stories, but he wrote Unified Force, so there was no like logistical way he was actually going to write that. Maybe Stover. He hadn't written a Star Wars book in a like he wrote Traitor, and then there was a decent gap between Traitor and Force Heretic. I know Alston wrote right before that. Yeah, I don't know. I'll go with Stover. I would go with Lucino if it wasn't for the fact that he wrote Unified Force right after, 2 books after, right? But then again, he also hasn't done great with duologies. Like his duology in New Jedi Order is not one of my favorites. Trying to think who else from Legends I could even go to. I mean, Stackpole, man, not really, not his type of story. Yeah, that's my answer now. That's my answer most of the time. Stover. If it's not Zahn, Stover. But yeah, I can't. I'm gonna have to think of other people when Sonic answers the question too. But I'm trying to rack my brain because like everybody else is in New Jedi Order. Most of the Legends staples are in New Jedi Order or didn't come about till the prequels. So I'm trying to think of like who could actually realistically write that wasn't already a part of New Jedi Order. Maybe bring back one of those other trilogy writers like Roger McBride, Alan from Corellian trilogy, I believe, and then there's KW Jeter for Bounty Hunter Wars. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it would be interesting to bring back another trilogy writer. Maybe Kevin J. Anderson, not always the top pick for a lot of people, but Kevin J. Anderson has written a trilogy. That would have been interesting to see, especially a paperback trilogy all kind of comes out at once. Would have been fascinating. He was one of the few voices that didn't have any voice. Big voices in the 90s didn't have any voice in New Jedi Order. But I'm gonna go with Stover for now.
Yeah, this is a question I don't know how to really answer, because it's not like this was like a like well acclaimed part of New Jedi Order. Like people look at Force Heritage trilogy, and are
Yeah,
like, why
the
was 3
worst.
books? Why is there like? Correct me wrong. I don't think there's really even like chapters in these books. It's just like long sections, breaks, switch POV. It's like I don't know. It's a weird one in general. Um, I would say like just because of how much more satisfying the Final Prophecy is, right? And how like there's like some Imperial stuff that's decent in here. The non-minor like theology that kind of comes out of it is like kind of wild to think about, and how it like plays out. It actually doesn't really play out, but I don't know. It's just a book trilogy that I was like, why was this like a full trilogy? Like I don't know. I don't really think about this trilogy as much. It's a weird couple of books, especially towards the end there, where I felt like things had like finally kind of settled back into gear, and we weren't like so pessimistic and drawn out. And then it's suddenly like, oh, here's like a trilogy of books before Final Prophecy. And there's a lot of stuff that feels like it was conveniently written to line up with Final Prophecy, because he's probably finished his book, and then like it's like, oh well, I have to do all these different things and cool ideas, and I still have to line it up with you. So yeah, I guess I'd go with Greg Keyes. I've always found it strange that he hasn't done more books. I think he probably would have done this in 2 books tops and been able to condense the storylines. I would have preferred the chapter-based storylines as opposed to page break the storytelling. Not my not a couple of Star Wars books I really think too often about. And I mean, you brought up Lucino too, but I don't think Lucino's 2 books are super great either.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, that's what I was
yeah,
saying. They're
and
not. They're some of my
like
least favorite.
nobody I think in the format in New Jedi Order's super great about like duology and trilogies, right? It just it a lot of the highlights are frankly just the individual books, the individual heavy hitters. And it's all these duologies and stuff that are like kind of like they're not really marketed as like less than adult novels, but they're like kind of not quite young adult novels. They're kind of like in betweener books that where all these duologies and stuff sort of happen. That I'm like, I don't know. It's a weird format to think about. I really want to reread all these books just to see what it would be like to just read some of these more main single books and not touch some of the bigger duologies and all that. I think Stackpole would have been interesting, but there's not it would have been more like Imperial perspective for a Stackpole that I would have liked to see, and obviously Imperial Naval and Pelion and stuff like that in those books. But yeah, I don't really know if I have like a great pick here. I would just say Greg Keyes, because it probably would just be a lot more streamlined with what he's doing in Final Prophecy.
Yeah, you could make Final Prophecy part of the trilogy instead.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think when it comes to the duologies and trilogies and New Jedi Order, he's the one that does it the best. Alston, maybe right there with his duology. Stackpole's is pretty good, but it's not amongst the best of New Jedi Order, but it's amongst the best of the duologies. But yeah, it's a tough one. I think I'm making it tougher than the question really is, because I'm trying to think of people who realistically would be a part of Star Wars then, because I could just be like, oh yeah, John Jackson Miller. But he doesn't come a part of Star Wars until the late 2000s, so it's like, okay, that he's not going to write one then. So yeah, cool question. Thank you for that one. Then Critical Thinker says favorite Legacy of the Force book. I pick Invincible, followed by maybe Tempest or Betrayal. Yeah, it's another tough one. I think Invincible would be my pick as well, but I think Betrayal is kind of underrated in the grand scheme of Legacy of the Force, because it's the beginning. You have Inferno is another one I wanted to say too, because I think Inferno's got some big moments there, some exciting moments. I think it's hard to go against Invincible. It really is. I mean, thinking outside of the box is not really worth it in this scenario. I think Invincible is the one I would go with.
I kind of don't want to go with Invincible because yes, it is the conclusion, but a lot of that like first third to first half is just Jaina kind of sitting and waiting around talking about stuff, and like you already know it's leading into this big climactic to it. I get that you have to like set the stage. This is twins who have been around since the beginning of the EU really kicked off, right? This is where all the storytelling of them as the next generation has kind of come forward. You know, Dark Empire obviously had like Anakin Solo kind of be forced into that, and then him kind of being such a big part of New Jedi Order and being chopped down by supposedly George Lucas of all people, right? I don't know. I don't know. I've never truly loved Legacy of the Force. Sacrifices, Sacrifice I've liked. Revelation, sure, I would say there's some pretty interesting things in there as well. Inferno, I can see your points, especially with everything on the firebombing of Kashyyyk. That is pretty insane to read as a whole. Yeah, I don't know. I want to say I will say but then there's stuff like Fury. Fury comes at like a really pivotal point too. I don't hmm. I'll say Fury. I'll say Fury. I don't really like all of these books. I think they have some great big like action moments and keep plots, but I don't really think of them as like individual books because there's just so much tonal whiplash that I only try to keep track of the events. Just reading Travis and how she like treats Jason and Jaina with the Mandalorians, and then like you go back to Denning and I'm like, oh, it's normal, but then the Denningisms come in. I don't really think about these books like that anymore, like as I would with. I think Fate of the Jedi is a lot easier for me to keep track of, frankly, than Legacy of the Force at points. So yeah, I'll say Fury.
Critical Thinker also says, past stream, you mentioned you've caught up on Absolute Batman. Which other current books have you been reading? Pretty much just Absolute Batman. I'm trying, again, like singles have gotten so expensive. And then on top of that, I just don't love having to wait a whole month for the next issue. I have so many other things to read that it's hard for me to stay on top of it. So purely springing out of like a kind of a renewed excitement about reading comics again that I got this summer after watching Superman. I was just really in a great comic headspace for the first time in years because DC, like as you know, Critical Thinker is my bread and butter. It's my favorite thing when it comes to comic books. So after years of kind of only reading Star Wars, both comics and novels for this channel, I got this kind of renewed love of reading comics. And summer's my favorite time to read, just in general. I love a good summer read and a beach read when you go to the beach and you can sit on the beach for a few hours and read. So when I go on vacation, I love to take a good comic book with me and just kind of blow through it. And I caught up on a lot of things TPB wise, but this summer, but I'm not reading anything singles besides Absolute Batman. I am trying to keep up with KO. I don't think I'm going to read the tie-ins, but I'm going to read the main event for the most part. And that's kind of it for me right now. Still trying to catch up on Star Wars concurrent issues so I can be up to date, but I'm not buying those singles. I'm trying to read them for the most part on services, but most for me, it's still mostly going to be TPBs. But those two series are the ones, and I'm really enjoying Absolute Batman. I think it's just such a fun take. That's one of the few books that like every week I really look forward to because I feel like I feel like you get something out of it almost every week too. Superhero style storytelling, unfortunately, nowadays is way more catered to the TPB. It's more about flipping the pages. It's more about the cliffhangers, and so when you've got singles that every week you're like, okay, now I got to wait or every month you're like, I got to wait an entire month to see what happens in part 1 of 6. That's still kind of the number one reason I'm out on singles, on top of the fact that now they're like $5 to $7 a single issue. But yeah, I'm now more open to trying some newer books than I used to be after a while of not buying singles, because the last time I consistently bought single issues was probably 2021, and so it's been a good minute. But yeah, which ones are you reading currently? Because I'm Definitely not reading too many, but whatever ones you say, I might give a chance, or I might pick up in paperback. And then if I really like it, like Absolute Batman, then I'll try to catch up in singles just so I can kind of be a part of the conversation. Next question was thoughts on Tinian and Ram V's Rebirth Justice League Dark run. I thought it was fantastic, a big improvement over the Men New 52 run. I'm glad they've returned to the Constantine pre 52 origin. Yeah, I'm very glad about that. I did not read the Rebirth Justice League Dark. I've read maybe half of New 52 Justice League Dark, and I was kind of with you. I like the art. Um, I like the concept. Like, I think it's a really fun, interesting concept. One, as a big horror fan, like, I love Frankenstein. I like those types of characters in DC, but it wasn't something that I was interested enough to keep up with. And then when Rebirth started, I was buying literally everything, and it was costing so much money that I ended up shrinking my pull list down to just the series I was already in. So then it kind of prevented me from giving other series a chance, like that one, which came a little later after the start of Rebirth. But I'm glad to hear it's really good because I definitely will check it out if you've said so, because I love Justice League and I love monsters, and I'm very much so a fan of the mystical side of DC. So thanks for that, Rec. Let's see what was the next one. Thoughts on Batman Flash crossover the button? I thought it was the best part of King's Run, but unfortunately, it didn't really lead to anything in Doomsday Clock. Yeah, I'm with you. I was really hyped. I was still reading singles when that came out. I was really hyped, excited to read it. Really excited for Doomsday Clock overall, but yeah, it kind of was just a nothing burger of a story. But it was well written. It was a good story. I just thought it was ultimately very unimpactful and forgettable when it came to Doomsday Clock. And then thoughts on Justice League Odyssey. Thought it was a really fun series. That it did a good job with its cast, and it'd be nice to have a similar type of cosmic book going on right now. Yeah, I haven't read that one either, so I'll have to check that one out. I have a few issues from it that I've purchased when local comic book stores have had sale days, like for Batman Day recently. One of my local comic book stores had 50-cent comics, and a lot of issues of Justice League Odyssey were in there, so I picked up some keys. Other than that, I haven't read any of it, but glad to hear it's good. I have heard that from a few people, so I'll give it a shot. I don't think there's an omnibus out for it yet. If there is one, I'll pick it up. And then, what do you think is the single weirdest Bantam book besides like Jedi Prince or some other random kids book? That's a good question. Weirdest Bantam book. There are a lot of weird Bantam
Yeah,
books.
Bantam is weird. That's the best way of putting it.
Yeah. Oh man, what an era of experimentation for Star Wars. I mean, one of the go-tos is Crystal Star. Crystal Star is pretty weird. Crystal Star is very sci-fi. Uh, I don't know if it really gets weirder than that. The Callista trilogy is worse. I think Callista, outside of Dark Saber, which is better than Crystal Star, the first and third book of Callista trilogy are so bad. But I don't know if they're weirder than Crystal Star. I think I gotta go with Crystal Star. It's such a strange story. If you guys haven't read that one, don't read it, but maybe check out a YouTube video or something about it, or read a summary. It's out there.
No, I think you have to read it. There's only one way to really understand how crazy some of those books are, and then how normal Kevin J. Anderson is with Dark Saber, and that's a sentence that shouldn't make sense, right? So I know Star Wars Decentralized, or Star Wars Centralized on Twitter is like the biggest fan I've seen of Barbara Hamling's books, and I still don't get why, but happy
Yeah,
for him, and I like a lot of his videos too, but. Besides Crystal Star, wow, I don't know, Courtship of Princess Leia, and it's mostly because it's I just don't really like what Han does throughout this book. He's just crazy psychotic about his relationship with Leia that he's kind of let be stagnant for so long at this point with all the other EU storytelling, and then he kidnaps her. I love everything with the Dathomir witches. Like we finally get to see them. Like that, it's really interesting, and they're very different than what we've gone with Clone Wars. Everything pre-Clone Wars with these witches at Dathomir are just so much different. There's way more emphasis on the clans, way more about integration and kind of half races, half species. Yeah, it's a lot more interesting, and usage of the force I thought was pretty interesting too. It is also kind of a Solo Commands sequel with all the Zinj stuff, which I think is handled fairly well, even if you don't read any of those X-Wing books. But man, I really do not like how Han and Leia are depicted in this book. It's just not been one of my favorites. It just feels like a weird mishmash of like such very fundamentally different Star Wars stories to me. So I could never really buy it. And especially with that title, the courtship of Princess Leia, I'm like, it's not really a courtship if you kidnap her, right? It's not really what I would say. Um, it's just a thing too with Bantam. Like if you read like Shadows of the Empire, I know it's a little bit more pointed there that it's wrong and weird, but Sizor's like pheromones and like how he's like, yeah, it's weird. It's really messed up what he's trying to do with Leia. I don't think Leia is ever really treated right in a lot of Bantam books, especially the kind of yeah. And I mean, in Crystal Star, yeah, was it Crystal Star that she like? It's already after one kidnapping attempt that she's like, no, this time I have to do this on my own without telling Han and
Yeah,
Luke, right?
yeah, I
Which is
think it
like,
is.
what the hell? Like, why would you do that? Like, why would you be? And I always remember reading the beginning of it. It's like so dramatic about like the kidnapping, about the kids, and I'm like, whoa, this like actually seems like reading as a kid. I was like, oh wow, this could be like really deep and dramatic. And then it's like, no, it's really not. All this extra dimensionality and all that. What's his name, Joru or whatever, that weird like alien mass that wasn't
Hmm.
quite in the Star Wars plane of existence. I don't know. Just
Yeah.
just not just not my cup of tea. Um I will say also like the whole Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. I think Before the Storm is pretty good. I think Shield of Lies, I really don't like the structure of it because it's like one half of the book is like dedicated only to like look to Luke and his story, and then you jump to like Lando, I think, in the second one. It's just a weird structuring that I don't like. Tyrant's Tyrant's Test, they fixed a lot of it, but it feels a little too late. And it's also just weird because it's like, oh, we're gonna finally know who Luke's mom is, but that could never truly happen. Not like George would really give that in. So it's always been a bait for like all of these people to like read the book for the first time, like, oh, what did the prequel eras have to say about Luke's mother and all that? And it's like, oh, it was always a dupe. Like that's the only way this could be written. So I don't love those elements of the book. I love all the military stuff and understanding way more about the naval structure, fleet organization, and everything. That's really cool. But I never really understood that stuff there. I still enjoyed the trilogy and the political tension, and I think it really pairs well, like what in reading with like New Rebellion with all that stuff happening there, and then if you get into like the Thrawn duology, there's like a nice balance of like Luke and Han and Leia aren't simply just like dictating story and stuff; they're like almost reacting to a galaxy that has shaped and formed after all their adventures in the original trilogy. That stuff I've always really liked more towards the end of the Bantam era. It just so happens to be that to get to that point, you have to read Barbara Hambley's books where Luke is like trying to have like a love story with like a Force ghost, but not quite a Force ghost. It's such a weird thing with him and Callista that I'm like, oh, if you want to read this all chronologically, it's got to be some tonal whiplash in the 90s reading all this stuff. But you probably weren't reading it all in order in the 90s either, with how they were all kind of written at the same time. The only things that you probably were reading in order were like the X-Wing books because you would get like 2 or 3 a year.
And then following up, Critical Thinker also says, because I asked what books Critical Thinker was reading from DC, and says Absolute Batman, Fractions Batman. I did pick up Fractions Batman #1. I thought it was good, but I haven't read much. I didn't read any of his other work leading up to it, so I felt a little lost. So I decided to shelf that for issue 2. Action Comics, Philip Kennedy Johnson's new Superman book. I actually did read first issue of that. I believe it's called Book of El. I don't remember the name of KO, Batgirl. Need to catch up on Green Lantern and Ram V's New Gods. Yeah, I heard Ram V's New Gods was pretty good. And Wade's Batman and Robin Year One. Yeah, that one I was behind on as well. And then I got the free Batman Day issue, which reprinted. the first issue of that, read it, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So I'm looking forward to picking that up in a trade when it comes out. And then, but yeah, I think that's gonna do it for us tonight. And then Critical Thinker follows up and says, thing that annoys me about BFC, which one was BFC? Black Fleet Crisis, is
Yeah.
because they established Luke and Leia don't know their mom. They don't find out about Padme until way later, and then they should. Meanwhile, they can retcon that they knew about Shmi since Tatooine Ghost, but not Padme. It's kind of frustrating. Yeah, that's a good point as well. But yeah, that's going to do it for tonight's stream. Thank you guys so much for joining us again. Appreciate all the discussion, fun discussion tonight, talking about a lot of different things. Make sure you join us again next week. If you are new, subscribe. If you're new as well, if you're watching on replay, join us every week. We go live 7 p.m. PST every single week. This week was delayed a little bit, but still about the same time. Make sure you hit the like button if you haven't. Subscribe for more. Comment if you're watching on replay as well. Stay tuned for more content. As always, we have our typical content on the channel every single week. We did start a program a few weeks ago. Not sure if a lot of you have seen it, called the Fan Question of the Week. So every single week, taking your guys' questions. We're plugging one every week as a video. So we're cutting it up, turning it into a video on the channel so more people can see it. So make sure you send in those questions. You might be the one that gets put up for the fan question of the week. Like I said earlier, we will have Visions coverage out for at least a review of the whole thing. And then we probably will be reviewing the duel, the Ninth Jedi episode, and then any other episodes that seems to have a lot of
Village Bride.
conversation.
Yeah.
Village Bride as well, as single reviews too. So we're going to do that. Didn't sound like too many people, at least in this stream, were interested in a Visions stream tomorrow. Maybe next week, once people have seen the whole show, give people a little bit of time, we can do one kind of a retrospective recap or talk about it next Tuesday. But we'll see. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if they've announced something that when the episodes are coming out. Not sure if it's
I think
midnight
it's
or if
midnight. Yeah.
okay, yeah, it seems like midnight because they haven't set a time. So usually that means right as it comes out or right as the clock turns to midnight. But we will see.
Yeah.
We're going to try to get through those, and then we'll have our coverage up for that as soon as possible. We'll also have a review out this week of The Last Order, the new book about Finn and Janna. And then we also are trying to get through Master of Evil, which will probably be out next week sometime for you all to enjoy our review of that. So thanks so much for watching the stream, everybody. We will see you all next week. Bring your questions. Have a good night. And yeah, see you next time.